So with pickleball becoming so popular that searches for pickleball paddles have now eclipsed tennis rackets in the United States and almost equaled it worldwide, the next big piece of gear, which would be shoes, was bound to start being looked at as a tool specific to pickleballers and not just as a hand-me-down from tennis, or not just as a shoe that has a different paint job from tennis. But do pickleball-specific shoes actually matter? Does it really mean anything? And can you actually extract more performance from them than you could a tennis or a basketball shoe? And really, what should you be looking out for in a pickleball-specific shoe versus those others? Where do the lines kind of blur? Where does it not really matter? And just give you kind of a guide as to making a better informed buying decision. Like I said, I was so taken aback by the Court Strike and Court Strike Pro from Selkirk that I asked them to sponsor this video because I did want to get this video out there, and I did think that their shoes were a really good example of comparing and contrasting tennis and pickleball and all just the really subtle differences that can come down to it. So a huge thanks to Selkirk for sponsoring this video. However, these concepts can be applied really to anything. It's mostly just about footwork and what you want to look for. So like I said, huge thanks for them to sponsoring this. More about them later though. So the biggest elephant in the room in terms of pickleball and what you need to look for in a pickleball shoe are the injuries that come along with pickleball. Now, ankle sprains are the biggest one, and they are happening at alarming rates. And not just because there are people picking up the sport who aren't used to lateral movement or just wearing running shoes, but also because pickleball puts your lateral ankle ligaments in such high risk due to the nature of the small court. And so when you take the mechanics of a sport like pickleball and put it on a court the size of a pickleball court, one of the best descriptions of the movement came from Aaron Cooper on a podcast I did, where he says that the movement of pickleball is more like the movement of a clock. You go from 11 o'clock to 6 o'clock to 5 o'clock, right, to 2 o'clock, right? And the way I kind of interpret it as is it's more lunge, pivot, and squat movement versus tennis, which a lot of times becomes more linear movement, right? You're actually traversing longer courts, so it's more linear versus in pickleball, where a lot of times, sometimes you're planted and you're just moving in different directions off of your one plant foot. Not saying you don't traverse square footage on a pickleball court, it's just that a lot of the movements become contained a lot of the time just because of the nature of how rallies develop. Versus on a tennis court where you actually start traversing the court, it just puts a lot of stress and strain on different parts of the body. The great thing about a tennis court being as big as it is that you have time to accelerate and decelerate, whether it's by taking steps or sliding, versus pickleball, where even though the pickleball is moving a little bit slower, you have less room to react and change direction and speed, which leads to crossing your feet and instability. So a good pickleball shoe has to take this short court footwork into consideration, which means they need to be, number one, lightweight enough not to feel clunky and allow more kind of ballet or light on your foot movement, but two, stable enough to where, going side to side, you're not buckling over your feet going, moving laterally. And yes, this is a huge consideration for tennis as well. But there is a reason why, at least in my office, the vast majority of injuries on the tennis court are plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, and ingrown toenails, versus in pickleball, where the biggest injuries are lateral ankle sprains, as well as, which we'll get to in a second, big toe joint arthritis. Speaking of that big toe joint arthritis, the next biggest consideration for a pickleball shoe is shock. And really, until you play a lot, you don't realize how much you are literally stomping on the court, like you're a toddler throwing a temper tantrum. Number one, because of stroke mechanics, but also number two, because of the short court. And this can lead to a wide range of injuries, but at a minimum, that repeat shock can really hinder your muscles from firing and ultimately wreak havoc on your timing, agility, and so on, as well as lead to these chronic repetitive injuries like big toe joint arthritis. Because when you're stopping that short with that much force going through your foot all the time, say you're in a fenced-in court or just in a smaller area, you're putting so much shock into that joint and asking it to bend through those really, really heavy movements versus, let's say, you're on a jog or you're traversing a tennis court or a basketball court where you can actually take a full gait cycle, right, and actually use your body's own mechanics to kind of shield yourself. In pickleball, there's just a lot of non-standard movement, and that's what leads to some of those shock-induced injuries. And so, of course, the biggest consideration for shock absorption as well as lateral stability, which we just talked about, is the midsole and how the midsole foam and the shank is set up with each other. And specifically, a shank that responds well enough and foam that isn't too squishy to the point that you can't recover from a hard step, but not too stiff to the point where you feel like your leg is being beat with a sledgehammer. So unlike basketball, where you can get away with softer foams or more streamlined shoes or longer shanks, a pickleball shoe needs to thread a very fine needle between being, number one, stable for side-to-side movement, not too stiff that it feels like it's a board underneath of your foot, but not too squishy to the point where you're not, number one, rolling over, because too squishy of a foam or too soft of a shoe is going to allow you to roll your ankle because there's not enough structure in the midsole, but also because a lot of times you are standing statically on a pickleball court. You need to have a foam that's comfortable enough for a lot of those times where you're literally just bending back up and down, kind of, digging for balls or digging for dinks in a kitchen. And so when you look at the very specific biomechanics of pickleball and the very specific dimensions of a pickleball court and the very unique demands that puts on your body, it's no wonder why the Selkirk shoes are so good. They spent over 2 years developing these. I was told by one of their product developers, they went through 24 iterations of this shoe. They didn't just come up with this stuff fly by night. And in a sport like pickleball that is growing so exponentially, it's so fast, so many more people are coming to the sport, and so many companies are trying to get into the sport and just put out something right away that looks flashy, or maybe they think that that's what the public is going to want. Having a stalwart like Selkirk in the sport, somewhere that's kind of like, a beacon in the night, to get quality products in a sport where, as you can see, I'm sure you've seen advertisements for everybody trying to make pickleball stuff because they think they can make a quick buck. As you can see with both of the Selkirk shoes, the Court Strike Pro and the Court Strike, they put so much thought, so much R&D, and so much testing into these prior to releasing them that, no, maybe they weren't the first pickleball shoe on the market, but you can better believe that they are the most well thought out pickleball shoe on the market. And I really appreciate that because, and any of you that have watched a lot of my reviews, all I really care about is what's the material and does it work? And honestly, paddle-wise as well as shoe-wise, Selkirk comes at their products with what problem is this trying to solve, not trying to solve problems that don't exist. And as you can see already in this video and later in the video, because these are the props in the video, because I feel like these shoes best represent what is best for pickleball, but not only that, but they also represent such a strong foundation to where the next line of shoes goes. No, I don't usually take sponsorships with companies in the court shoe space, whether that be pickleball, tennis, basketball, or I do a little more running. But when I saw what these were and how they weren't trying to just hit you over the head with useless technology or buzzwords, but actually put in really thoughtful features into a shoe that anybody could get into, it really kind of took me aback. And they always say they're all about pickleball, that's all they do. And although, these are great tennis shoes and great outdoor basketball shoes, it is pretty cool to see what all that R&D, that 10 plus years that they have been in existence, what all that is culminated in. You come up with something truly unique, and in this case, truly suited to the movement of pickleball. So thanks Selkirk for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into it. And I hear from a lot of people that really no matter what the sport is, that they want full-length shanks. They think that that is kind of like the key to everything because they've seen it in marathon shoes, and that's kind of like the next big technology. You see it in basketball shoes a lot as well. The thing is that unlike a basketball shoe where sometimes you see near full-length shanks because the shoe is designed to be run the full length of a basketball court or designed to be used for jumping constantly, pickleball is nearly a purely ground game sport. And so for that fact, a good pickleball shoe needs to prioritize ground contact, ground feel, and stability. That's why in a pickleball shoe, yes, you do want a pretty strong shank. And having it top-loaded is great because you get a little bit more snap out of it versus a bottom-loaded shank, which is a little bit more just focused on kind of stability, making the shoe not buckle over. You don't need it to be full length. A lot of times you don't want it to be full length because you still need to have that ground feel. You want to at least have some comfort as well for those times where you're just standing statically on the ground. And also in terms of full length shanks for tennis, I don't really think they're necessary. They can help sometimes if you're, repeat serving over and over and over again. So I think there's much more of a consideration for full length shanks in tennis, or at least 4-foot leaflets of shanks in tennis. I just think unless it's basketball and you're looking to jump over and over and over and over and over again, in terms of pickleball or tennis, it's definitely not necessary, and the ground feel a lot of times is actually more important than the full length shank. at least in tennis, I can actually see a bigger reason for it versus pickleball just because of the nature of the serve. And so with that being said, I guess I'll just get right to contradicting myself because, another huge difference between pickleball and tennis is that pickleball prioritizes squatting. And unlike tennis, where a lot of the time if you're digging for a ball, your legs are spread far apart, creating more stability and getting your center of gravity lower to the ground. Whereas in pickleball, a lot of times you find yourself squatting for a ball with your feet a lot closer together. And also when you're squatting in pickleball, a lot of the time you aren't trying to hit the ball really hard. So not only do you need to go up and down 1,000 times during a match, you also need to execute shots with a lot of touch while going through these squatting movements. But also when you're trying to hit more of that feathery touch shot, a lot of times your feet are more parallel to each other. So you're not 45 degrees, right? Like in tennis a lot of the time, where even if you're hitting open stance, you still got some angle in there. A lot of times with pickleball, you're just standing there. So that inherently creates a lot more instability. So number one, you're in more of an unstable position, but number two, you're trying to execute a shot that's, basically like playing mini tennis or a super feathery touch volley up at net. So for those types of shoes, number one also comes down to the foam and shank setup, but also the shape of the tread. That's why in pickleball, a full-length flat tread profile is always going to, at least in my opinion, be a lot more stable than decoupled, separated tread pods, like one tread pod in the rear foot, one in the forefoot. Not saying that you can't play great with those shoes, it's just that if you want the most stability for just pistoning up and down, a lot of times with your feet parallel to each other or coming to a screeching halt somewhere where you're not necessarily in a position to get 45 degrees or get into a more stable position, that flat, full-length tread is going to give you a lot more stability. And speaking of that tread shape and tread profile, remember, pickleball is played on asphalt, cement, and concrete a lot, but it's also played on hardwood, and interestingly, can be played on a more damp court versus tennis. Whereas in tennis, once the ball gets a little bit waterlogged, you're really done. You're calling it. So really for outdoor courts, a simple wave pattern or herringbone is fine. Broken up circular patterns or razor patterns are also fine as long as it's multi-directional. But if you want a tread that works both on indoor and outdoor courts, and specifically more slick outdoor courts, microgridding in the rubber is really the way to go for that, specifically for pickleball. It works for tennis too, but in tennis you end up burning through that microgridding faster because a little bit more of the sliding, a little bit more of that high friction footwork over a long period. So in terms of pickleball, I think the microgridding of the rubber, you just get more out of it and you get more usage on multiple courts from that microgridding, and it's more durable over time. And remember, all tennis, basketball, and pickleball shoes, at least in my opinion, should have some form of a lateral flange, which is a little bit of an outcropping on the outside of your foot, kind of right before your pinky toe. And a lot of times in basketball, you see those flanges get smaller and smaller and smaller as the shoes are meant for more long court, north to south movement. Whereas in tennis and pickleball, where they're predominantly lateralizing sports, you really do need some form of lateral stability. Does that clip need to be super wide or bulky? No. It just needs to be something out there to stop you from completely rolling over. In terms of, is there a difference between tennis and pickleball for that? No. But for either sport, you better have it, or those ankle sprains are just going to keep getting more and more and more and more, especially because I see so many pickleball players, especially the casual pickleball players, playing in running or more training shoes. And a lot of times, like a pickleballer will tell me, well, they're really stable training shoes. Yeah, they're stable for going front to back or lifting weights or just jogging on a treadmill. They're not stable for side-to-side movement. So just remember, whether it be tennis, whether it be pickleball or basketball, you might be able to get away with playing in a running shoe or a cross-training shoe for a little while, but eventually it is going to catch up to you. And I can't tell you how many people have come into my office, broken ankles, sprained ankles, whatever, that have said, I've played for how long on this and have never had a problem until the day they do. So just remember, you always want to look for that flange, whether it be tennis, pickleball, or basketball. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in terms of the uppers, honestly, in terms of the differences between pickleball, tennis, and basketball, I think the uppers are kind of the least important part. They're important, but as long as there's some reinforcement, what we call foxing for side-to-side stability, enough room for orthotics, and a runner's not to keep your heel from slipping and blistering up or getting plantar fasciitis. Honestly, the biggest concern to me for the uppers of a pickleball shoe is for quick containment, meaning that they're able to adapt to movement, but also able to contain fast fast twitch steps versus a running shoe where you can really get away with a near lighter than air upper construction, but really little regard for side to side stability. That's why running shoes can get away with that. They don't need to be cutting side to side. I mean, when you're watching the Boston Marathon, the New York Marathon, when's the last time you saw someone trying to cross somebody up, right, to get ahead of them? It just doesn't happen, right? Although that would be funny. Versus, in basketball, tennis, and pickleball, you're going side to side all the time, whether it be to, create space for yourself on a basketball court or in pickleball, just because you're always going side to side. And so for a pickleball, tennis, or basketball shoe, like I said, you just want an upper that is going to keep your foot stable in the shoe and not allow a ton of movement back and forth inside the shoe, or toggling, your heel coming out of the shoe, because that can lead, like I said, to blistering, can lead to plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis, especially in tennis, because of the nature of the serve coming up and down, up and down, up and down. That's why Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis are so prevalent in tennis, and that's why bursitis is so prevalent in pickleball, because in pickleball, like I said, a lot of times you're standing, static stance all the time, and that can really inflame those bursas on the bottom of your foot. Whereas heel pain is a huge issue in pickleball, tennis, and basketball. It's caused by vastly different things, and the actual type of heel pain is also different. And I guess this would actually fall into the category of the uppers, but the thing that ties the whole shoe together is the tongue. And so although the tongue I think is important in tennis and pickleball, in pickleball, because of how much you are squatting, how much you are asking your ankle to bend, the tongue better be pretty comfortable and it better be pretty protective against a shoelace irritation, because although in tennis, yeah, you're doing a lot of bending, you're getting low a lot of the times. Like I said, in pickleball, sometimes it's that, just that axial bending up and down, right, that pistoning that can really cause a lot of lace irritation. I noticed that I notice lace irritation more in pickleball than I do tennis or basketball. So just remember, if you're looking for a shoe, make sure number one, the tongue is padded enough to prevent that lace irritation. Number two, has enough of a gusset in it, which means what attaches the tongue to the rest of the shoe to hold you steady in the shoe. And remember, most, if not all, tennis shoes can be used for pickleball. It's just that only some are optimal. And in basketball, that's just accentuated a little bit because so many basketball shoes are meant for north to south speed, right? Covering a court, they're not really meant for side to side. So although there are some basketball shoes that are good for pickleball, there are way fewer than there are tennis shoes. So in terms of a basketball shoe, you really have to look out more. You really have to make sure that those are, that those are decent, because sometimes a basketball shoe, they're not as bad as a running or training shoe, but a bad basketball shoe can sometimes really introduce the same issues that a running or a training shoe could. But I'd say the one biggest difference between tennis and pickleball that I didn't start to notice until it started getting into the negative, digits outside this winter, which hasn't been in a while, and me having to find more indoor places to play pickleball, is that they put pickleball courts in some bizarre areas. Whereas like in tennis, most tennis facilities are set up for tennis. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can track the ball really easily on a tennis court because the backstops are all set up for your eyes to have enough contrast between the ball and you. Versus in pickleball, where a lot of times it's in a warehouse, it's in an old church, it's, the place one time I go, it's in an old mountain bike facility, like an indoor mountain bike park, right? So you're playing in these areas that aren't necessarily set up for the hand-eye coordination of pickleball. So a lot of times you're like only catching the ball at certain points. So like I said, it's those fast twitch movements. You need a shoe that can kind of course correct very easily, because sometimes, you're just not picking the ball up. That happens so much more than tennis, those just quick, like, oh no type adjustment steps, that oh no movement, that you're out of position because you think the ball is one place and it is somewhere else. So I think that also has to really be taken into consideration, and maybe also a reason why you see so many more ankle sprains and those types of injuries, because I think sometimes people just get crossed up by the fact that there's just not a clear flight path, the ball to your paddle that you can see, versus in tennis where most, if not all, indoor tennis facilities, it's set up so that you can track that ball the second it comes off of somebody's racket. And that was something I didn't really notice until I started playing in a lot more indoor facilities, because in outdoors, it's really not a big deal. But, outdoor courts, and also you're introducing the fence, right? A lot of times those courts are much more contained, and so you're having to stop really quick so that you don't run into a fence. But of course, love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. You know, do you really think having pickleball shoes specifically is going to help your game? Has it helped your game in the past? Are you happy with what you're in? I'd love to know in the comments down below. Especially love to know if there are people out there in the audience that are watching my videos that are still wearing running or cross-training shoes that will be in the comments saying, oh, they're just fine, I never had a problem. But yeah, it's interesting seeing things from my perspective because I always see the carnage. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you do want to check out the Court Strike or Court Strike Pro, I will leave those linked in the description below. And thank you as well to Selkirk for sponsoring this video. I'll leave a link to them in the description below as well. Respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.